Hello everyone, my name's Damian. I'm Whole Life Carbon Lead at BAM UK and Ireland. So we're a Tier 1 construction organisation. We've got about £5 billion revenue a year. We typically have about 200 projects going through our books each year, so there's a lot going on. I'm here today to talk about, I guess, more of the organisational change that needs to occur in order for lower carbon outcomes to be achieved in the built environment. So probably a slightly different flavour to the rest of the presentations. It's been a long time since I've been in a room with so many carbon geeks. And it's been really cool to get an insight into through the windows of people's day-to-day lives and the things that they're concerned about. So I'll share with you a window into my day-to-day life and the things that I'm concerned about. And hopefully it resonates and we can leave here feeling happy about life and hopeful. So I've worked in construction for about 12 years across various climate roles in design houses and in contractors. I'm educated in economics and political economy, and I think because of that I've always been quite fascinated in how systems work, and more importantly how they can be changed. So I spent years as a consultant working for Arup and Mott MacDonald, helping cities and organisations craft their decarbonisation strategies. These were always quite thoughtful, well-designed documents. We did lots of stakeholder engagement to get to these strategies and action plans, and they required lots of collaboration. But what I've found is, time and time again, these strategies and action plans were sitting on a shelf, and they weren't necessarily getting operationalised, which is a bit of a dream killer, really. So I guess they were quite ambitious, but what I've realised is they were quite disconnected from the day-to-day decisions that actually shape carbon outcomes in an organisation. And that's what led me to BAM. So I started with BAM about 2 years ago, primarily because I wanted to be closer to the action. I wanted to understand what it really takes to deliver low carbon outcomes from the inside. So when you're a consultant, you're kind of a few steps removed, and it's quite difficult to have the impact that I was after. And what I've learned in the 2 years since joining BAM is it's really bloody hard. It's not because the people in these organisations don't care, but because the system in which they operate isn't set up to make things easy for driving change. People are very busy. Carbon feels very abstract. I'm a carbon expert. I've struggled to understand quite a lot of the talks that I've heard today, if I'm being quite honest. And so if you imagine a quantity surveyor or an estimator trying to get their head around it, in addition to all the other things that are coming at them around social value, biodiversity, the digital revolution, you can understand why they put their heads in the sand. And I guess what that leads to is all too often the sustainability function in an organisation becomes reduced to carbon reporting, essentially, right? And so that's a challenge. And typically we tend to get hyper-focused on ESG submissions and compliance or project-level carbon assessments. And so typically my sort of function and our function is seen as something that's adjacent to what's going on in the business and not necessarily embedded within it. In many organisations, it operates a bit like a business within a business, because you have to understand what everyone else is talking about and the language they use in order to communicate with them. And so you end up with this quite unhelpful scenario where you understand what 50 different disciplines do and none of them understand what you do. So it's quite a valuable function, but it's disconnected from the mainframe of decision-making, delivery, and critically commercial strategy. And that's why I've come today. So I'm here today to talk about how we can evolve from counting carbon to managing it, from reporting to real decision-making. Climate risk is transverse. It cuts through every aspect of an organisation, from finance to procurement, from design through to delivery. It affects not just us, but the whole value chain, so our clients, our supply chain, the communities that we serve as well. Wiring decarbonisation into the mainframe of a business is difficult, and achieving meaningful outcomes in this space isn't something that's been done at scale before. It requires more than data, and it requires a shift in behaviours, in the culture, and in how we make decisions every single day across the organisation. And to do that, we really need some structure. We need a common language that we can all speak and go out into the world and communicate. We need a framework that helps us to lead, integrate, collaborate across the value chain. And that's where PAS 2080 comes in. So some of you may recognize this document. I've seen it referenced on a few slides today. I had the privilege of being one of the lead technical authors of it while I was working at Arup, so yay. And I want to start by saying something that might surprise a lot of you, and I certainly see it from engaging with clients and writing bids, and that is that PAS 2080 is not a guide for how to quantify whole life carbon. In fact, it barely mentions it. And that's a really common misconception, I think, in the industry. In reality, it's a framework for how we manage carbon strategically, collaboratively, and systematically. It's about embedding carbon into the decisions that shape outcomes, not just measuring it after the fact. Now, at its core, PAS 2080 is about carbon leadership. And leadership here doesn't just mean setting targets, it means ownership and accountability. It means individuals and organizations stepping up to take responsibility for carbon outcomes and not just reporting them. It's also about integration, so carbon can't sit in a silo managed only by the sustainability team. It has to be embedded across all functions: commercial, design, procurement, operations. Everyone needs to understand how their decisions influence carbon and be empowered to act on it. And finally, it's about value chain collaboration. So there's been a lot of conversations about this today, I think, so it's reasonably well understood that this is a challenge. And that's because no single actor can deliver low carbon outcomes alone, right? So designers, contractors, suppliers, clients, we've all got a role to play within achieving these outcomes. And I guess that the PAS 2080 provides a common language and a common structure to enable this to occur and for everyone to work together more effectively. So when we talk about PAS 2080, we're not talking about a technical checklist. We're talking about a strategic enabler, a tool that helps us to lead, to integrate, and collaborate in pursuit of better carbon outcomes. This diagram here, I like to call the heart of PAS 2080. At the center is the clause that matters most: integrating carbon into decision-making. Everything else, quantification, baselining, procurement, reporting, feeds into that. And it's very clear in that diagram, which we spent a lot of time trying to make for this very purpose. So I'm just going to run through what I consider to be a few of the key clauses that support this integration. So the first one is Clause 5, which is around leadership and governance. And this is about setting the tone from the top of an organization. It's about creating the structures, the roles, and the responsibilities that ensure carbon is treated as a strategic issue, not just a technical one. Leadership means ownership. It means carbon is on the agenda at the same level as cost, risk, program, safety. The second one, which we've heard a lot about today, I guess, is quantification and baselining. And this is where most people start, and it's where most people often stop as well. Yes, we do need robust data. Yes, we need baselines, but these are not the end goal. They're the foundation. Without them, we can't make informed decisions, but on their own, they don't change anything. Clause 7 is target setting and reduction. The targets are essential because you've got to have a goal, otherwise you're never going to score. But again, they're only meaningful if they drive action. So this clause is about setting the ambition, but also about defining the pathways which will get projects and organizations there. So it's about making carbon reduction part of a project's key success criteria. And then finally, Clause 8, procurement and supply chain engagement. And of course, we've heard quite a lot about this as well today. And I think this is where things get real. If carbon isn't embedded into procurement, if it's not in the brief, the contract, the evaluation, then it's not going to influence anything about delivery. So this clause is about aligning incentives across the value chain so that everyone is pulling in the same direction with the same outcome in mind. All of the clauses in there are important, but they're not standalone activities. They are enablers for the decision making. And they only create value when they are connected together, where they feed into the decisions that shape the design, the delivery, and the operation of the assets that we deliver. And that's why I often say that PAS 2080 gives us a framework, but it's how we use it that creates the value, right, for our organizations and our clients. It's a tool for aligning decisions and not just measuring outcomes. And this brings us, I think, to the critical shift and a key point in the talk that we need to make as an industry. We've gotten very good at counting carbon, but counting isn't managing. And if we want to influence the outcomes, we need to understand who's making decisions, when they are making them, and how carbon data can support those decisions in real time. So now I'm going to have a little dive into what that looks like. So something that I've seen time and time again over the 12 years that I've been working in this sector is a carbon specialist running alongside a project that's moving at 1 million miles per hour, trying desperately to gather data, build a baseline, or report progress to a client. But the project does not wait. By the time the data is ready, the decisions have already been made, oftentimes. The carbon report becomes a retrospective exercise, useful for compliance, but too late to influence any decisions or any outcomes. So unless carbon is properly programmed in, unless it's a standing item in design management, pre-construction, procurement, commercial meetings, with clear ownership assigned to those disciplines, it will remain just that, a reporting exercise. Reporting is retrospective. It tells us what happened. It's a bit like looking in the rearview mirror there. Managing carbon is different. It's like holding the steering wheel in the car. It's proactive. It's about embedding carbon into the decisions that shape the project. And that's the shift that I feel we need to make as an industry, not just as individual organizations, but a whole kind of ecosystem across the various value chains in which we sit. One of the tools that we should be making more use of more consistently in our decarbonisation efforts across the industry is decision mapping. So it's a way of understanding how decisions are made and how carbon can be integrated into that process. So it's important to ask who's making the decision, what are they deciding on, when is that decision made, what carbon data is needed at that point, and how is that data actually going to be used by a decision maker to inform their decision in a different way. And this brings to mind walking in the woods, which is why I put that beautiful picture there. So when you're walking through the woods, there are many intersecting pathways along the way, and each path represents a decision point. Some are clear, some are uncertain, and each one leads to a different place or outcome. And here's something that we often get wrong when we focus on calculating all the time or making baselines that are very pretty, is that we worry about getting it exactly right. But the truth is many decisions do not need perfect data to be informed by carbon, right? They just need good enough data at the right time. And that's critical. If we wait for perfect data, we miss the moment. The decision gets made without carbon in the room. So the question becomes, how do we get the right level of insight to the right person at the right time so that they can make a better choice? Because if we don't know who's walking that path when they're reaching a fork in the road or what information they have in their hands at that moment, how can we expect carbon to influence the direction that they're going to take? Decision mapping helps us bring clarity to that journey. It helps us understand where the real levers are in the organization and how we can support better choices earlier, which is critical. So, yeah, I'm going to be very honest. I'm making it sound quite straightforward, but it is really, really difficult, not just within individual organizations, but across the entire value chain that are delivering these projects. Every organization is grappling with how to do this, often from a position of uncertainty, limited knowledge, competing priorities. Projects are under immense pressure to be delivered on time, on budget, and safely. These pressures have historically taken precedence over everything else, including carbon and other non-financial metrics. When delays happen early in a project, as they always do in every single project, carbon is one of the first things to be deprioritized. So everyone says, we'll come back to it later. We've just got to get the project back on track. So it's seen as non-essential. And the team focuses on getting back on track, but by the time there's space to think about things again and bring it back in, it's too late. So the key decisions have already been made. And it's kind of like a bit of a domino effect. So those early decisions, often rushed or made without full consideration, set off a bit of a chain reaction when it comes to delivery. Once the first few fall, the rest follow. No matter how much effort we put in later, we're locked into a path that's incredibly hard to reverse. Carbon becomes a co-benefit, not a driver. So we end up identifying where we accidentally achieved a carbon reduction as a byproduct of something else occurring rather than intentionally designing and delivering for it. Unless a project team actively changes what it does, it will deliver something very similar to the last time they were trying to deliver something. I think in the emergency that we're in, that's not really good enough. I see every project as an opportunity for change, and we don't have the luxury of taking our foot off the accelerator, especially when we've barely started pushing down on it. Too often, clients, bless them, rush the early stages to get the bulk of the program moving, but those early stages are where the most important decisions are made. If we rush those decisions, we lock the project into a trajectory that no amount of sustainable effort later can undo. And even when sustainability teams raise the right issues, they're not necessarily always listened to, ever. And, and that's a big problem. Why? Because the program's tight, because the client has multiple heads and therefore multiple voices, because the sustainable solution often requires lots of innovation, and innovation takes time. Because many of the people making decisions, like project managers, etc., aren't incentivized to prioritize sustainability, they're incentivized to deliver on time and on budget. So when faced with a choice that adds risk or effort, the safe route always wins. Not because people do not care, but because the system is not set up to support those better choices and provide the space and the incentivization for those better choices. Now I'm going to take you through it says what we're doing at BAM. What we're starting to do at BAM, trying to do, and hopefully it makes sense in the context of what I've just said. So at BAM, we've set ourselves quite a bold but necessary target, which is to reduce our Scope 3 emissions 50% by the end of the decade, to reach net zero by 2050, and that's from a 2019 baseline. So what that means in the context of our procured goods and services is we've got to cut about 250,000 tonnes of carbon off of our footprint in 4.5 years. So this isn't something we can achieve through marginal gains or isolated initiatives. It requires systemic change, fundamentally, right? And that's why we've established a sort of Scope 3, we call it a Tiger team. It's based on the film about the Apollo space rocket where they had to rescue the astronauts from space. And so the idea is we have to get this done. Let's get the right people in the room who can make decisions on behalf of the business and try our best to kind of just work at some of these challenges and barriers that we're facing organisationally. So within the group, it's chaired by someone who sits on our board, our executive director for delivery assurance. It's also got our head of procurement and our design and engineering assurance director in it, and loads of happy, smiley people like myself. And these are people who have the authority and visibility to drive change in the room, in the moment, for the business. And our role is to help them move quickly in the right direction, maintain momentum. It's not a sustainability team initiative. It's a business-wide transformation effort. So I sit in the transformation team, and critically it's being led from the top. So we're trying to get our leaders to move beyond being tokenistic to actually kind of getting in the boat with us and making sure we're all rowing in the right direction. We had quite a lot of success in the Scope 1 and 2 space last year, so we're just looking to kind of replicate that for Scope 3, which is obviously a lot more poorly understood and much more complex. To structure our approach, we've identified 4 key fields of play, which are areas where we believe we can have the biggest impact on Scope 3 emissions quickest. So first, data quality, yay, and timing. So we're working to improve the accuracy and the reliability of carbon data, especially early on in the project life cycle, right? So where a lot of these decisions are getting made about what the form is going to be, which materials that we're going to specify, who we're going to procure from, etc. If we can generate those early estimates and try and automate it as far as possible, we can identify where those carbon hotspots are or carbon risks, and we can manage them down through our pre-construction processes. And we're also focusing on ensuring that our as-built data is robust as well. So at the moment, we tend to have a top-down, cost-driven approach to understanding our Scope 3 carbon, which obviously causes problems because oftentimes to get lower carbon materials, you've got to spend more money. So while your footprint is going down in reality, in your reports, it's going through the roof because you spend more time. So more money, sorry. So That's what we're looking at in that field of play. Second is understanding the market, so appreciating that to get that data piece moving is going to take quite a lot of time. And so in the interim, we've got 7 key categories that we think bring about 60 or 70% of the emissions into our organisation. So we're working with our strategic suppliers to actually understand what do their pathways look like and what does that mean for us. So if we do nothing, how close to that target will we get? And then from there, we're able to build relationships with them that are much more proactive and less arm's length, and to really start building what they think is coming around the corner into our trajectories, so that when we aggregate them all up, we get a sense of do nothing, do something, do a hell of a lot. Okay, how much are all these things going to cost us? And then we can pick a pathway that's suitable. Third, and critically, I think it came up in the last presentation, is around procurement integration. So we're embedding carbon into our procurement processes, updating our policies, including benchmarks and weightings in our tenders, and revising our link agreements with key suppliers as well. The final one's around design collaboration. So I guess the focus so far has been on how do we reduce the carbon at one end of the pipe, the thin end of the wedge, but actually 80% of the projects we work on, there's some design element required. We work with all the major design houses in the country, so how about we get better at how we engage with them? And how about we start setting them requirements, which they're really eager to have, but embedding it in their contracts, right? So that then they can do the thing that they want to do and help us reduce the amount of carbon that's turning up on the project in the first place, so we can procure less. And so across these 4 areas, we believe we can kind of shift the dial reasonably quickly, but we shall see. Watch this space. So critically, recently, I'm a bit conscious that I'm a carbon expert and I've got a team of carbon experts, and we sit in a room of carbon experts and come up with ideas. So what we've done is we've kind of set those 4 fields of play within the Tiger team, but then to explore what's possible within each of those 4, we've run a series of sprint sessions with discipline leads, process owners from across the business, people who really understand how things work. And this goes back to trying to emerge from being a business in a business to giving people the insights that they need and how it intersects with their jobs, so that they can then come up with the action plan. And the goal really is to build a shared understanding of what could and should happen in the near, medium, long term. And through this process, we've been identifying the people who are going to help us deliver on that, what we call the coalition of the willing. And these colleagues are motivated, they're capable, they're ready to lead change in their areas. They just need to have someone like myself plug in and explain it to them in a simple enough way so that they get it and can carry on with their lives. And so we're now developing an overarching action plan. The idea is it will define who is doing what, when, and how. It's not just the roadmap, but it's the delivery plan, and then that's getting reported into our divisional leadership team who sit on the board every month. And the aim is clear, to make carbon part of our mainstream decision-making, not a bolt-on to a project, not a reporting exercise, but something that's embedded in how we design, procure, deliver our projects. So what does this look like in practice? Well, I'm imagining that we're going to be able to generate a carbon baseline automatically whilst we're tendering for projects. By integrating carbon factors into our estimating and planning tools, this will give us a time dimension, so we'll know exactly when we're expecting carbon to turn up on our projects. Our quantity surveyors then have it in the format they need to be able to manage it effectively, because it's in their language, it's in a format that they understand. I think it also allows us to identify highest carbon elements of a project before we even break ground. So while we're going through pre-construction, if it's all baked in where the commercials are being built up, then we can really quickly identify where the hotspots are, begin building those into our pre-construction processes so that it's treated in the same way as getting the commercial costs down. We've also been developing a library of solutions, so sector-specific solutions that can be looked at by project teams as a starter for 10 and reviewed through the pre-construction process. So each opportunity has an owner. It's reviewed regularly in project design, commercial meetings, and that means the right people are focused on the right problems and the solutions. Typically, someone like me will get called by a bid team, and I get to come up with a wish list of everything I think should be happening in a project. But if no one's checking it from a design perspective and how it impacts the structural integrity of something, or from a commercial perspective and what the cost difference is, then it's just going to get, and it does get, chucked straight back out. So if we can carry those opportunities into final design and then into procurement by asking the right questions, setting the robust benchmarks and weighting carbon appropriately, hopefully we'll be procuring best in class within those commercial constraints that exist. When we deliver a lower carbon project, it's important that we celebrate it, that we build better benchmarks, and we continue to create momentum. And most importantly, I think training came up a little bit earlier, but our people will become more confident, carbon becomes part of their language, the insights they need are there when they need them. And the ownership for those decisions sits in the right part of the business critically, so where the levers exist to make difference actually occur. And I'll be honest, I think it's really difficult. We're not pretending for a second that we've cracked it. We may not get everything right. We probably won't get much right the first time. But we're setting ourselves up in a way that gives us the best possible chance of success. We're committed to learning as we go. We're open to sharing what works and what doesn't, because even with the best internal systems, we're still part of a much larger ecosystem, one that includes clients, designers, suppliers, and delivery partners. And if we're going to succeed, we need to collaborate in ways that are much more open, more transparent, and more aligned than ever before. Because no one's cracked it, it's really important that we focus on how we can collaborate effectively, and that's what I'll talk about next before I close out. So I guess through this 2-year journey I've been on, sitting within an organisation trying to crack it, the one thing that's become clear is we definitely can't do it alone. So even with the best governance, the best intentions, we're still just part of a much bigger ecosystem. And that ecosystem is very complex. Each element of it has its own pressures, timelines, priorities. But PAS 2080 reminds us that collaboration isn't optional. It's fundamental. It's one of the core principles of the standard. It's not just about sharing data. It's about aligning decisions, aligning responsibilities and incentives across the value chain. And that's where we've still got a really long way to go. Too often we're all waiting for someone else in the value chain to take the lead and tell us what to do. And in the meantime, the opportunity slips through our hands. What we need is radical transparency. We need to be honest about what's working and critically what is not working. We need to share our common points of failure more often as an industry, not just 1 or 2 case studies and success stories, because that's how we grow and that's how we're going to learn. And at BAM, we're committed to doing that. We're open to sharing what we're doing, what we're struggling with, and what we're learning along the way. We're actively looking to become part of working groups, form working groups, collaborate with peers, clients, suppliers, not just to meet our own targets, but to help the whole industry move forward. So before I conclude, I'd like you to just reflect on what the blockers are in your organisation and what are the enablers, and who do you need to collaborate with to make progress? Because if we're serious about decarbonisation, we need to stop thinking in silos and start thinking in systems. And that starts with collaboration. So, the thing I came to talk about, what happens in the next 12 months? Where do we go from here? So I think there are 4 main things that we could all do with focusing a lot more on, regardless of where we sit in the value chain. First, mapping the decision points, so understanding who's making those decisions, what they're deciding on, and when. Because if we don't know that, we can't expect carbon to influence any outcomes. Second is to improve the carbon data quality. We don't need perfect data, just better data. Data that's timely, relevant, and good enough to support the decisions that are being made when they are being made. And third, we need to embed carbon into governance. Make it part of how projects are reviewed, assured, and managed. Carbon should be a standing item, just like cost, risk, and program in all project management agendas. And fourth, and most importantly, I think, is to collaborate openly. So making sure we share what's working, share what's not working, form working groups, invite others in, because no one has solved the problem yet, or even slightly cracked it, really, and we won't get there alone. So it's going to require all of us. And I think if you're going to take one thing back to your teams and your organisation, I think it's this: carbon must be treated like cost. It must be measured, managed, and owned. And that's how we'll build a future that's not just low carbon, but also high value. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it.